My name is Alice. I'm 35 years old and serve as Chief Financial Officer in Austin, Texas. This beach house is everything I built with my own hands. Every brick, every window pane paid for in tears and the years I spent being treated like a shadow in my own family. And yet that afternoon my mother, the same woman who once told me coldly I should be grateful just to be kept around, stood in my living room, casually scanning the space like she was assessing a property about to change hands, then calmly said, "This house would be perfect for Sarah and the kids. You don't need something this big." I didn't cry. I set down my tea, pulled out my phone and spoke clearly into the receiver. "Come now. Bring the envelope." 3 hours later the police arrived. And I saw my mother, afraid. Have you ever been made to feel worthless by your own family, like your value was invisible no matter how hard you worked? Share in the comments if you've ever been the extra one in your own home. Tap like if you believe even silence has its limits. Subscribe to the channel because the story I'm about to share is where everything turned around. I'm not someone who likes to dig up the past, but there are memories that don't fade with time. They stay sharp, like old wounds that ache every time the wind shifts. I grew up in a 2-story wood house on the outskirts of Waco, Texas. The porch always creaked when the wind blew, and the doorbell squealed even at the lightest press. But in that house there was only one name spoken with softness. And it wasn't mine. Sarah, my older sister, was the chosen one. Everything in her life was new, was bright. Puffy white dresses, a pink hairdryer, full breakfasts on test days and hugs that never ran out. Me. I learned to stay quiet when I was hungry, to stitch my pant hems with old thread, to clear the table quickly so I wouldn't get side-eyed by Mom. I remember my 14th birthday clearly. Not because of a party or presents, but because of a half-eaten cake left on the table like a warning. I had just gotten home from school, still sweating from mandatory laps I had to run for being late to gym. Sarah sat on the couch, putting on red lipstick and giggling with her boyfriend. On the table sat a chocolate cake with a chunk missing. I could tell the name Sarah had once been piped in pink frosting across the top, now scraped off carelessly. In its place was Alice, scribbled with nearly expired white frosting. I stood there staring at the cake, then at my mother who was setting out forks and knives without even looking up. "Cut it already, Alice," she said. "Don't just stand there like a statue." No birthday wish. No eye contact that said I mattered. I remember pretending to cough to cover the lump in my throat. I remember Sarah glancing at me, then looking away like I wasn't even worth sharing air with. Some nights I was locked outside in the backyard, sitting under the cold sky on a rusted swing. Mom said it was because I got home late. 15 minutes late. I'd run full speed from the bus stop. But the door was already locked. The lights off. No note. I curled up under the porch roof, stuffing my coat into the door gap to block the wind, biting my lip to keep from crying. Meanwhile, just weeks earlier, Sarah had vanished for 2 days on a weekend trip with friends, and no one said a word. Dad, back when he was still alive, just sighed and handed her extra money just in case. I learned how to disappear. How to not take up space. How to walk softly and speak less. The less I crossed Mom's gaze, the safer I was. My father was the only one who ever looked at me with something different in his eyes. He didn't say much, but once in a while as I washed dishes he'd place a hand on my shoulder and whisper, "You okay, sweetheart?" And I always nodded, even when I felt like I was breaking inside. He died when I was 19 in a car crash that Mom said was because he drank too much. But I never believed her. There was something in her eyes when she said it, cold and completely devoid of grief. Not long after the funeral, I saw the house deed had been transferred entirely to her name. Sarah got her own private account funded from the life insurance. Me. I got a single message, "Don't ask for anything. You were lucky to be sent to school." I worked 3 jobs at once, saved every dollar, ate instant noodles every night through 4 years of college. Not a single call. Not once did Sarah visit me at school. But every Thanksgiving came with an email from Mom. "Sarah's coming home. Don't show up and make her uncomfortable." I got used to being erased from every family photo. And now, with my own home with a life rebuilt from the rubble, they knocked on my door like I was some default place to land. There are wounds that don't bleed but they never heal. Have you ever been the forgotten child in your own house? Have you ever longed for someone to ask genuinely if you were okay? I used to think I'd stay small in their story. But not anymore. There comes a moment when you rise, not to prove something to them, but to remind yourself, you're no longer the child in the hand-me-down dress waiting for scraps. I left home the day I turned 18 with a worn-out suitcase, a few threadbare outfits, and a cold warning from Mom at the door. Don't come back unless you're someone useful. I didn't know what useful meant back then. I only knew that if I stayed, I'd vanish forever under Sarah's shadow. I rented a room the size of a shoebox near an industrial park. I worked night shifts at a sandwich shop, cleaned offices in the morning, and waited tables at the mall in the afternoon. After each shift, I'd limp back to that room, feet numb from standing, hands raw from cold dishwater. But I didn't complain. Because I was in charge of my own life, even if it was inside four damp, moldy walls with a leaky roof. By day, I took online courses in accounting and corporate finance. I couldn't afford college, but I had cheap Wi-Fi and a second-hand laptop. I tore through free courses, learned to read financial statements, analyze cash flow, understand smart leverage. Every morning, I wrote down my goals. Today, risk analysis. Tomorrow, budgeting models. I turned the hallway into a wall of strategy charts, taped sticky notes everywhere. Some nights I'd collapse at my desk and dream of Mom saying, "You're not good enough. Just quit." But I never did. 6 years later, I landed my first full-time job at a small startup in Austin, as a finance assistant doing anything they needed. I fetched coffee. I stayed late to finish balance sheets. One day, the CEO, a woman named Clarice, called me into her office and said, "I've never had anyone call out the weaknesses in my financial plan the way you did yesterday. I want you here for the long haul." I became CFO when the company hit a $30 million valuation. I thought I'd cry the day I got the title. But I didn't. I just sat quietly in my office holding a cold cup of coffee, looking out at the busy street through the glass, and whispered to myself, "I made it." A few years later, I bought a beach house in Florida. It had been wrecked by a storm, peeling walls, rotting floors, holes in the roof. But the moment I saw it, I knew. This was where I'd begin again on my terms. I spent nearly 10 months renovating. Flying down on weekends, Zoom meetings during the week, choosing tiles and lighting at night. I picked every patio stone, every cabinet handle. Not because I was picky, but because for once in my life I had the right to choose where I'd live. No one congratulated me. No message from Mom. No email from Sarah. I used to imagine maybe she'd call, say something like, "Saw you in the company news." Not bad. But nothing. Silence. As if my success made them uncomfortable, not proud. Until one April afternoon, the doorbell rang. I came out, fingers still smudged with paint from the window frame I'd been working on. There stood my mother. Sarah. Sarah wore a wrinkled red dress, face hastily made up, clutching the hand of her 7-year-old daughter, Ava. Mom looked the same as ever. Beige cardigan, curled hair, a worn designer bag hanging from her shoulder. Both stood under my porch like nothing had ever happened. "We need to talk, Alice," Mom said, trying to keep her voice calm. I stood still, looking her dead in the eye. And in that moment, I knew. This visit wasn't about care or nostalgia. It was about need. It was about desperation. And I was right. Just a few minutes after stepping inside, Sarah spoke like it was already decided. "This house is incredible. Great school nearby, beautiful beach, big backyard. Ava would love it here for a few months, just until we figure things out." I didn't react. No nod. No shake. I just poured the tea, set the tray on the table, and sat across from the two women who once made me believe I was the extra in my own life. My mother took a sip of tea and spoke like I hadn't understood. "Sarah's house got foreclosed. Her husband made some poor financial choices. It's a shame. But you've got space to spare." I looked at them without anger, without bitterness. Just clarity. In their eyes, I was still little Alice from before. The shadow behind someone else's spotlight, the one who would always give way, because she'd been taught love meant sacrificing until nothing was left. I smiled faintly, then stood up, grabbed my phone, and made a call. My voice was as calm as the still air in the room. "Hey, I need you to come over. Bring the envelope. And have everything ready." I wasn't planning to stay quiet. We sat outside on the balcony in the late afternoon, when the sunlight had softened, casting a golden shimmer across the freshly polished wood floors. The ocean waves rolled gently in the distance, rhythmic as a breath. Ava sat cross-legged on the ground, arranging seashells, calling out, "Mom, look," from time to time before bending down again to carefully shape the shells into flower patterns. I kept my distance, seated at the far end of the bench, hugging the hand-stitched pillow I'd made during the early months of fixing up the house. Silence wrapped around us like a thin veil, pleasant but tight, like it might tear at any moment. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice light like she was just making an observation about the weather. "The elementary school nearby looks pretty decent. I checked it out. Just a 5-minute walk. If only Ava could go there. That would be amazing." I didn't answer. I just turned and smiled at Ava, nodding as she held up a pale pink shell with pride. Sarah went on, sounding more upbeat. "I was thinking if we stayed here for a few months, Ava could have an awesome summer. The backyard's big enough for a kiddie pool and a barbecue spot." She turned to Mom and lifted her chin like signaling. "Right, Mom?" My mother picked up the cue instantly, no hesitation. "Of course. This house is way too big for one person. You're not planning to live here alone forever, are you, Alice?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "How I live is my business." She gave a soft chuckle, shaking her head like I was being dramatic. "I'm just saying, Sarah needs a stable place to start over. Things have been really tough for her. And you, well, you already have everything. What more could you need?" I didn't respond. My fingers tightened slightly on the pillow's edge. I thought of all the nights I slept under the hallway light in a college dorm because my rented room didn't have a working desk lamp. Of running through pouring rain to get to my shift because I couldn't afford to fix my car. Of this house, every brick, every window frame, built from thousands of hours of relentless work. And now they looked at it like a gift that should be shared, as if I were just holding it for them. "You already have everything." A sentence light as thread, heavy as stone. Mom turned to Ava, her voice softening. "Isn't this place just like your dream house, sweetheart?" Ava nodded sweetly. "I like the hammock." Sarah gave a quiet chuckle. "I can totally picture her napping out there. I could take the upstairs room. It has that ocean view. The other room could be my office. It's small but bright." My palms started to feel cold even as the evening sun still warmed the floor. They didn't say, "If you allow it." They didn't ask, "What do you think?" Every word they spoke sounded like decisions already made, just waiting on my nod to move in. I stood up, used the excuse of making more tea, though I really just needed air. In the kitchen, as I was filling the kettle, my phone buzzed. A message from Linda. The neighbor who'd lived here for over 10 years, the one who brought me apple pie when I first moved in. "Saw your mom at the store. She said Sarah's moving in with you. That's wonderful for both of you." I froze, my hand still on the kettle handle. Wonderful for both of you. They'd already told others as if it were a done deal. Like I had no say in my own house. Mom had either lied, or worse, she had spoken with certainty about something she fully believed would happen. I typed back one line, "I never agreed to that." Linda replied with a confused face emoji. I didn't need to read more. When I stepped back onto the balcony, I heard my mother's voice, low, almost whispering, to Sarah. "Susan from the next street said she could lend a few things to help fix up the upstairs room if needed. She thinks you and Ava moving in is the best thing." Sarah laughed. "Really? That's great. I was most worried about stuff being in storage too long." I walked over, set the teapot down, and looked directly at Mom. "What did you tell Susan?" She looked at me, surprised I'd asked so bluntly. "Oh, I just said, maybe Sarah might stay here for a bit. I mean, that's not so bad, right?" I didn't answer. Just calmly poured tea into the white porcelain cup, then turned to Sarah. "How many people have you told you're moving in?" Sarah shrugged. "Just a few close friends. Don't make it a big deal. We're only thinking of staying temporarily. We're not trying to take anything from you." I set the cup down. The sound of ceramic hitting saucer was quiet but sharp. Ava flinched and looked up. I softened my voice, turning to her. "It's okay, sweetheart. I just slipped." Then I raised my head, locking eyes with Mom and Sarah. "I never invited either of you to stay. I never said I'd share this house. But it seems like you've all already made your own plans, haven't you?" No one replied. Only the ocean outside continued its steady rhythm, like the beat of my heart shifting into something slower, but clearer than ever. I went to my room, closed the door gently, and locked it from inside. My phone screen still glowed with Linda's message, that pale light like a cold blade. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the voice recorder app, and scrolled through the saved files. Every conversation since they walked into my house had been recorded. Clear, intact, unedited. The line, "This house would be perfect for Sarah and the kids," rang out in one clip, followed by Mom saying, "You have so much, you shouldn't be selfish." I wasn't the type to record people. But after years of being twisted in stories, blamed for things that weren't mine, I'd learned that silence protects no one. Truth sometimes needs receipts. I texted Thomas, my attorney, the one who helped with my property paperwork after Dad passed. I needed him over soon. Bring copies of the house documents and set clear legal boundaries. They were shifting into psychological occupation. He replied with one word. Understood. I stood up, took a deep breath, and stepped back into the living room. The air was thick, even though Mom was gently stroking Ava's hair and Sarah pretended to be focused on her phone. I walked to the kitchen, opened the cabinet, grabbed a glass of water like nothing had happened. But when I turned, I caught Sarah's sharp gaze. She was watching me, her eyes narrowing as if she sensed something was off. "You're awfully quiet," Sarah said, dragging the words. "Not like you. You usually explode by now." I didn't answer. I just sipped my water and stared out the window toward the sea. Sarah stepped closer, still holding her phone. "Just curious. Are you recording us right now?" Her voice was light as air, but there was steel underneath it. I set the glass of water down. "Why are you asking that?" She shrugged, but I noticed the subtle twitch at the corner of her mouth. "Just a feeling. You're quiet, cold as ice. And every time you get like that, you're usually planning something." I didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it either. Sarah straightened up, her tone turning sharp. "Delete everything. If you really did record us, delete it. This might be your house, but we're family. No one should be treated like that." I slowly walked over to the table and sat down. "Family." Sarah froze. My mother looked up too, as if she could feel the cold wind rolling in. I looked them both in the eyes. I grew up in a family where every important decision happened without me in the room. When I turned 14, my birthday party was thrown with your leftover half-cut cake. When I got accepted into a summer scholarship program at 16, Mom said, "She doesn't need it." Sarah's never been. And now, when I've bought a house with money I earned on my own, Mom goes and introduces you to the neighbors as the future new owner. So forgive me if I don't feel obligated to close my eyes and go along with it again. My mother placed her hand on her chest, her voice shaking like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Alice, you're tearing this family apart." I nodded slightly. "No. I'm protecting myself." She frowned, softening her voice like she was trying to appeal to emotion. "You've always felt like the one who got the short end of the stick. But you don't understand. I raised 2 daughters on my own, each with their own personality. Sarah was more delicate. She needed more care. You were strong. You always knew how to survive." I looked at her, feeling an emptiness open up inside me like a bottomless well. Being strong doesn't mean not needing love. It just means I no longer had the right to ask for it. Sarah cut in, her voice laced with irritation. "So what do you want, huh? We didn't steal your house. We just needed help for a while. You've got more than enough." I stood up, each step slow and deliberate. "I don't owe anyone anything. I've given too much in silence. But I won't stay quiet." The room fell silent. Even Ava looked up, wide-eyed and confused, sensing the thunderstorm brewing in the hearts of the adults but not knowing why. I walked to the front door and opened it like I was welcoming a guest. Thomas stepped in, holding his familiar leather case. I turned back to face them, voice calm. "This is my lawyer. From this moment forward, we speak within legal boundaries." And I saw something in my mother's eyes that I hadn't seen in over 30 years. Not anger. Not disdain. Fear. Thomas sat at the head of the dining table, where the soft glow of the afternoon sun filtered through the white curtains, casting light across his gray shirt sleeve. I sat across from him, back straight, hands wrapped gently around a cup of untouched tea. My mother and Sarah sat off to the side, both silent, as if the final string connecting us had pulled tight enough to snap. Ava had been sent upstairs with a picture book, kept away from a conversation that was no longer going to be kind. Thomas opened his case and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly worn. He slid it toward me, his eyes pausing on my hand like a quiet nudge. I recognized that envelope. I'd seen it once, buried in the house records, but I had never opened it. Not out of fear, but because I always thought I had time. I took it, slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, the slanted script instantly familiar. I hadn't seen my father's handwriting in over a decade. To Alice, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. But I'm leaving you the only thing I can, the truth. My heart pounded harder with each word. The room seemed to narrow. The house by the sea is for you. I bought it under my name without anyone knowing. Your mother wouldn't have agreed. Sarah has always been protected. But you're the only one I saw real strength in, even though no one ever said it to your face. If you've found Thomas, he'll give you what you need. I looked up. Thomas nodded slightly as if confirming every word was true. Sarah leaned forward, her voice tight. What is that? Dad never wrote letters like that. I didn't look at her. I kept reading. One more thing. Someone tells you I died in an accident. Don't believe it right away. I found some irregularities in the family's financial accounts. And 1 month before the incident, I changed the beneficiary on my insurance policy. I paused. My hands trembled a little, but my voice held firm. Have you found the policy yet? I asked. Thomas pulled out a copy. The original is gone. But we have confirmation documents from the insurance company. They recorded the change a month before Mr. John Marsh passed. The new beneficiary, Alice Marsh. I turned to my mother. She remained still, her gaze dim. You told me Dad died in an accident. Drunk, slipped on the highway. But he wasn't the one driving that night, was he? She said nothing. Thomas flipped to another document. This is a summary from a private investigator. No signs of alcohol were found in his system. But the car's brakes were tampered with. A report from the auto shop confirms someone altered them a week prior, using a fake name. Sarah jumped to her feet. What are you saying? That someone made him die. I looked at her, then at my mother. Someone knew that if Dad left anything to me, they'd get nothing. Someone changed the insurance beneficiary days before his death. And when the money was paid out, I never saw a cent. My mother exhaled sharply, her hand gripping the teacup so tightly her knuckles turned white. The account that received the money was erased afterward. But old bank statements still exist, Thomas continued. The account was registered under Caroline Marsh. Opened 2 weeks after her husband passed. Closed 3 months later after all the funds were withdrawn. I turned the cup in my hands, my voice slow and even. While I was living in a damp rental room, working 3 jobs, eating instant noodles, unaware that my father had tried to give me a fresh start. Sarah turned to our mother, her voice shaken. Mom, did you really take that money? My mother didn't deny it. She simply placed the cup down gently, stood up and walked to the window. Her shadow stretched long across the floor. Your father was weak, she said, her voice echoing like it came from far away. He always thought you were special. But he didn't see reality. You were cold. He never made me proud. I couldn't let him give you everything and leave Sarah with nothing. I stood up. You don't get to decide what's enough for anyone. Dad chose. You didn't respect that. Sarah collapsed into a chair, face pale. I thought everything I had was because I earned it. But it turns out, I've been living on what was never mine. I looked at the two of them. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just the feeling of opening an old cabinet that had been locked for years. The musty scent rising. But at least no more secrets. I picked up the letter and folded it carefully. That letter wasn't just a message. It was proof that I hadn't imagined my father's love. That someone had once seen me, believed in me, and wanted to protect me in a way I never dared ask from my mother. The late afternoon sun brushed against the window frame, spilling across my shoulders. For the first time I felt my father standing beside me, even though he had been gone for nearly 20 years. My mother spun away from the window, heels striking hard against the wooden floor. She marched to the table, yanked the folder from Thomas's hands, skimmed the pages, then threw them down like they'd scorched away part of her power. Papers, she snapped. They don't change the fact that you're tearing this family apart. Your father has been gone almost 20 years. And now you want to stir up old stories just to prove you were right. Sarah shot up from her seat, hair messy from the sudden movement. You can't kick us out. You think a couple documents mean you can do whatever you want? This is still a family home. You live alone, do you really need all this space? And what about Ava? What will she think being tossed out like a dog? I stood still. Even when Sarah slammed her palm on the table, my voice stayed steady. No one's being kicked out. I'm simply reminding everyone that this is my house. I never invited you or Mom to live here, and I never agreed to share this space. Planning things behind my back, introducing yourselves to neighbors, assigning rooms without my consent. That's trespassing. Sarah laughed, a sharp cracking sound like something long held together finally snapping. Trespassing? Are you threatening to sue your own family? Your birth mother? Your sister? Thomas stood slowly, pulling a dark blue business card from his pocket and placing it on the table. No one's being threatened. But as the legal representative for Ms. Alice Marsh, I am obligated to protect my client's property. This home was inherited directly under a private clause from her late father, Mr. John Marsh. The deed has been notarized, filed, and verified in the county's property system. Anyone who remains here after being asked to leave may be considered unlawfully residing. My mother glared, her eyes boring into Thomas like she wanted to set him on fire. But he didn't flinch. He remained calm as if this were just a routine real estate negotiation. Sarah's voice turned sharp. So what, you're going to call the police? Do that in front of Ava? Let her see her aunt being treated like a criminal? I didn't turn. I just pulled my phone from my back pocket and dialed. You've called me cold for years. One more time won't change anything. I held the phone to my ear. Hello, this is Alice Marsh. I need a unit dispatched to my home address regarding a property dispute and request for official witness documentation. Yes, there's a lawyer on site. Sarah clenched her jaw. My mother collapsed into her chair like someone had drained the blood from her body. I knew that feeling, being cornered with no way out. I had lived in it for the first 30 years of my life. Now it was their turn. Thomas turned to me, his tone gentler. I'll stay until the officers arrive. I also brought backup recordings of the conversations between you and your family over the past few days, in case we need to establish patterns of coercion or intimidation. Sarah let out a bitter laugh, no longer mocking, just resigned like someone who had lost all control. I never thought you'd come back like this. I thought you were the quiet one, the good daughter, always willing to endure. And now you dare. I cut her off, calm but firm. I didn't come back. I just stopped stepping aside. The doorbell rang, 2 sharp, deliberate chimes. I didn't hurry. I gave no signal. Thomas walked over and opened the door. A uniformed officer stepped inside, holding a notepad followed by a female partner. Thomas handed them the documents and introduced himself. I saw Sarah swallow hard as the officer looked at her seriously. This residence is legally owned by Ms. Alice Marsh as confirmed by the county property records, the officer read aloud. I need 2 individuals, Caroline Marsh and Ms. Sarah Marsh, to confirm the reason for their presence and whether there is any written consent from the homeowner allowing them to reside here. My mother said nothing. Sarah stood frozen. I had nothing left to say. Every word had been spoken. Every piece of evidence laid bare. The officer turned to me. Would you like to file a harassment complaint or request a limited residency order? I took a deep breath. I want every future action from speech to occupancy to fall within legal boundaries. They may stay tonight. Her daughter is still too young to be displaced abruptly. But after that, I want them to leave. And if there are any further attempts to occupy, threaten, or spread false stories to neighbors, I will formally press charges. Sarah spun around. Fine. I'll go. But don't think this means you've won. I'll tell everyone what happened so they know the kind of person you really are. I looked her in the eyes, unblinking. Tell them. But I have my own story. And I don't need anyone to believe it, just to hear it. I turned back inside, the light from the hallway stretching long across the floor. My mother's shadow was still visible on the wall, but it no longer held any power. It was just a shadow standing in a space she once thought she could claim as ours. 3 weeks after my mother and Sarah left, everything on the surface seemed normal again. I watered the plants each morning, dropped Ava off at school on time, and continued working from my home office, a room with an ocean view I used to dream about back when I was sleeping in a windowless basement unit. But something wasn't right. A chill clung to my spine every time I opened an email, every time there was a knock at the door in the middle of the day. That unease became real on a Monday morning. I was on a video call with my company's accounting team when the doorbell rang. A man in a gray suit wearing a federal ID badge stood on my front step with a serious look and a thin folder in his hand. Alice Marsh. That's me. I'm Agent Klein with the Internal Affairs Division of the Federal Tax Bureau. We've received a report of potential financial fraud and personal tax evasion from an anonymous source. I'd like to speak with you privately and review a few details. I wasn't surprised. I invited him in, poured a glass of water, and led him to my office, where I had long prepared a red-labeled binder. Financial Audit, Marsh Company Plus Personal. I didn't ask who the anonymous source was. I didn't need to. I handed over 5 years of tax returns, third-party audit reports, personal asset breakdowns, outsourcing contracts, and verified donation and deduction records. Every figure was precise. No smudges, no discrepancies. Agent Klein spent over an hour going through every page, nodding instinctively whenever he came across a fully documented report. Finally, he looked up, his tone much calmer than when he'd first arrived. I've been doing this job for over 10 years, he said, and I have to say, it's rare to see records this clean and well-maintained. I'm guessing the person who reported me didn't think so. We don't draw conclusions based on accusations. But personal motives? I've seen them before. I understand. He stood, thanked me for my cooperation, and promised to send the official clearance documents within 3 days. I walked him to the door, and only after he turned the corner of my quiet street did I make the first phone call. Rebecca, it's me. Do you still have contacts inside the Sentinel's internal data team? I do. What's going on? I need information on Sarah Marsh. The Harmony Steps Foundation. I want to see their financial records for the 3 years leading up to the dissolution. I heard that foundation once received funding from several major banks. You suspect something? Not suspect. I need to know. Rebecca used to be a financial investigative editor in Houston. She's freelance now but still well connected with media analysts. She didn't ask anything else. Just promised to get back to me within 5 days. On the 5th day exactly, she sent me an email with a series of PDF files and a single line of note. Read page 14, where the forged signature starts. Not just suspicious, intentional. I opened it, and what I read made the blood drain from my body line by line. Sarah had once managed the Harmony Steps Foundation, a nonprofit supposedly created to help single mothers re-enter the workforce. But in the 3 years before the foundation shut down, there were numerous undocumented expenses. Event budgets for events that never happened, duplicate consulting contracts, unexplained cash withdrawals from the main account. And then one unfamiliar name kept showing up, Kayla Sands, signed on multiple financial aid receipts. But Rebecca had tracked it down. Kayla didn't exist. The listed address belonged to my ex-boyfriend. I didn't have to think twice. Only Sarah knew about that relationship. And only she would be shameless enough to use a fake identity to justify siphoning funds. I printed the entire file, placed it neatly into a hard folder, and labeled it, Harmony Fraud. Then I called Thomas. Do you know anyone at the county attorney's office who handled the Harmony Foundation case? I can find out. What's going on? Something big. But this time I'm not just defending. I'm going on offense. He didn't ask further. He never needed to. That afternoon I came home like always. Ava was drawing in the living room, and the sound of waves crashing outside the window moved in rhythm like steady breathing. But something inside me had shifted. No more feeling cornered. No more shrinking back to let others play the victim. I was reclaiming the right to tell my own story. And I had truth standing beside me. That evening the wind picked up early. Thick clouds rolled over the ocean, casting shadows across the spotless window panes I'd cleaned the day before. The pinewood door rattled gently from a draft sneaking down the hallway. I stood in the kitchen drying a dish, but my eyes were fixed on the wall calendar, neatly pinned above the fridge. A red circle marked Wednesday, 48 hours. That was the court-ordered deadline for my mother and Sarah to vacate my home. Everything had been handled through proper legal channels. No room for debate, no space for recycled emotional chaos. But even though I knew it was right, my chest still felt weighed down by stone. There's something in the human heart that stirs, however faintly, when you hear the crying of someone who once left you behind. My mother sat on the long sofa, her back slightly hunched, eyes once proud now rimmed red. A notice printed in bold letters, sealed with an official stamp, lay on the coffee table in front of her. Police had come that morning, verified all the documents, handled everything swiftly and politely. No questions needed, the file was airtight. Sarah didn't cry. She stood by the window, gaze fixed on the sea as if searching for something to cling to out beyond the tide. I recognized that look. I'd carried it throughout my childhood, the expression of someone who's about to lose something they always thought was theirs by default. "We're family, Alice," Sarah snapped, her voice rising with the wind rattling the windows. "You can't do this. Throw out your own mother? Your sister? All over some piece of paper." I didn't respond right away. I walked slowly to the table, pulled out a chair and sat across from my mother. She still wouldn't look at me. Her shoulders were smaller than I remembered, her hair grayer than last time, but her eyes, when she finally raised them, were the same, guarded, silent, and faintly disdainful. "No one's being thrown out," I said, voice low and calm. "The court simply affirmed that this house is mine. And anyone not invited needs to leave, according to the law." Sarah let out a dry laugh. "The law? What law gives a daughter the right to turn on her own mother? And what about Ava? You plan on tossing a kid into the rain too?" I met her eyes directly. "I'm not putting anyone on the street. You both have other places to go. You're still receiving monthly support from the welfare grant. I've seen the deposits. And Mom still has Dad's old savings account, doesn't she?" My mother flinched. Her eyes flickered. I didn't need her to confirm. This house isn't a prize. It's a boundary. A clear line between what was and what is. Sarah stepped forward, spitting each word. "So this is revenge. You think we deserve this?" I took a deep breath, letting the sound of the waves outside fill the space between us. I had waited years to say this. I wouldn't rush it now. "No," I said softly, like the sea settling after a storm. "This isn't revenge. I'm simply no longer allowing anyone else to define my worth." My mother let out a quiet sob, the first time she had ever cried in front of me without yelling, without blame. She covered her face, but I saw her lips trembling. I didn't know if it was shame, or just the sting of losing. Maybe both. I didn't move closer. I didn't reach out like daughters do in movies. I just stayed in my seat, refusing to step back. Sarah couldn't stand the silence. "You think those documents will make you happy? Living alone in a big house. What's the joy in that? When Mom dies, how will you feel then?" I looked at her, not with coldness, not with softness. Just the eyes of someone who had finally learned how to say no. "When Mom dies," I said slowly, "I'll hold a proper, respectful funeral. But I won't live my life carrying the weight of things she never apologized for." Sarah opened her mouth to fire back, but nothing came. Maybe she realized in that moment that I was no longer anyone's shadow. I had been the last to leave the old house, but the first to build a real one. The wind outside howled harder. The curtains brushed against the window panes. And I knew, some storms don't need thunder to wipe away an entire era. Late that night, the house settled back into its usual quiet rhythm, like it always did before the storms arrived. I turned off every light on the first floor, leaving just the soft glow of the little lamp in the kitchen corner. My mother and Sarah had packed up, at least the parts they were willing to pack. I didn't push. Some broken pieces are better left untouched. I only wanted to hold on to what was mine. Ava was still awake. She sat curled up on the couch, legs tucked under a puffy blanket, her curly brown hair a little tousled from a long day. When I stepped in, she looked up, her deep dark eyes reflecting the soft yellow lamplight. In that moment, I saw my younger self, sitting alone on the stairs, listening to adults argue behind a thin wall. I quietly sat beside her, pulling the blanket back over her shoulder. "I thought you were asleep." Ava shook her head, whispering, "I'm not sleepy." I didn't ask anything else. Some nights you don't need comfort in words. Just someone who won't leave. After a while, Ava got up and walked to the dining table where I had left some sketch paper and a box of crayons. She drew for a long time, her little brows furrowed in concentration, sometimes looking up to memorize details around the room. Finally, she came back and handed me a page. I held it up. It was a scribbly but colorful drawing. A yellow house with a red roof and blue-trimmed windows. In front of the house stood a curly-haired woman holding a teacup, smiling. There was the flower garden I had just planted, a bench on the porch, and the ocean in the distance, sky blue and wide. At the bottom, in slightly slanted childish handwriting, "Aunt Alice, this is the best house in the world. I wish I could stay." I pressed the paper to my chest as if Ava's words had touched a place I forgot was still alive. A place no one had ever named. I looked at her. "You really like it here that much?" Ava nodded without hesitation. "It's quiet here. No one yells. You don't stay mad. And here, no one forgets me." I stared at her for a long time, my throat tightening. Not out of sadness, but because I realized that love, the kind I had been looking for in all the wrong places from all the wrong people, was right here in the eyes of a child who wanted nothing but kindness. I pulled Ava into my arms tighter than I ever had. "You know, love doesn't come from sharing blood. It comes from someone choosing to stay, choosing to listen, choosing to love without conditions." Ava leaned into my chest. "So, can I stay?" That question broke open something in me. I didn't answer right away. I knew Sarah was still her mother. And I knew I couldn't decide for her. But I also knew one thing for sure. If there was justice in this world, this child deserved a place to call home. Not just because it had walls and a roof, but because she was loved the right way. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "We'll figure it out. But no matter what, you have to remember this. I'm always here. I'll always be the place you can come back to." Ava didn't say anything else. She just nodded, blinking slowly like she was memorizing my every word. I stayed with her like that for a long time, until her breathing softened and her tiny hand went limp on my knee, fast asleep. I lifted her gently and carried her to the guest room, tucked the blanket around her, kissed her forehead. Moonlight stretched across the drawing on the dining table. I looked again at the words, "I wish I could stay." I smiled, not out of politeness, not to look strong, but because I genuinely felt peace. Not because I had beaten my mother or Sarah, but because I was finally holding on to what mattered most. A kind of love that didn't need to be named, didn't need conditions, didn't need to be proven. A love that could heal me too. The news broke on a windy morning, just as I stood on the balcony watering the pale purple lavender pots. The headline flashed across my phone screen. "Former nonprofit executive arrested for financial fraud, linked to misappropriation of children's relief funds." The photo was a face I knew all too well. Sarah. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. Just a strange quiet settling in my chest. Like after all these years, the world had finally rotated back to its axis, without me having to scream. Local papers started uncovering the suspicious spending during Sarah's time with the foundation. Unexplained withdrawals. Inflated invoices. And then a list of beneficiaries, some names that never actually existed. I knew the scandal wouldn't end with one article. There'd be charges. Maybe probation, maybe worse. But I wasn't thinking about Sarah anymore. 3 days later, my mother came back. She stood at the gate just past noon holding Ava's hand. The child wore a red coat, her hair messy, her face tired like she'd traveled a long road with no destination. I walked out without saying anything. We looked at each other across the white wooden gate I had painted myself. My mother spoke first, her voice missing the confidence it once carried. "Alice. I have nowhere else to go. She needs somewhere stable." I looked her straight in the eyes. "She can stay. But you can't." Her voice shook. "You can't do this. We're family." I stayed calm. Family isn't a place where someone gets used as a shadow so others can shine. And it's not where love comes with conditions. She went quiet. Her gaze dropped. No more calculating, no more superiority that used to make me feel small in my own life. I leaned down, gently took Ava's hand. "Go on inside, sweetie. I'll be there in a minute." Ava walked through the gate, quiet as a breeze. When the door closed behind her, I looked at my mother again. "I don't want to ruin your life. But I won't let you ruin anyone else's either. I've spoken to an attorney. A child protection advocate will work with Ava. Everything will be clear. By the book. And no one gets to change the name on the paperwork." My mother seemed to collapse inward. She didn't cry out loud, just bowed her head, her shoulders trembling. But I didn't move toward her. I had been the one to comfort those tears before. And I paid for it with years of being erased. As she walked away, her figure shrank under the sunlight, staggering like a kite with its string cut loose. I didn't feel joy. But I no longer felt guilt either. That afternoon, Ava sat beside me on the balcony, the place where we often shared our quiet moments together. In front of her was a new notebook, a purple crayon held firmly in her hand. "Aunt Alice, today I want to draw the house again," she said, her eyes lighting up. "But this time, I want it to be purple. Because purple is the strongest color." I smiled, choosing not to correct her. I didn't say that purple was the color of royalty or sorrow. Because to her, purple meant strength. And that was the truth worth holding on to. Ava leaned over her drawing, lips pressed together as she colored in the windows and the roof. On each window pane she drew a heart. Small but clear. "Why are you doing that?" I asked. "Because anyone who lives in this house has to have a heart that knows how to love," she answered without looking up. I didn't say anything. I just leaned back, eyes on the sky slowly shifting into shades of dusk. The sea breeze brushed my cheek, carrying the scent of lavender and a hint of salt. When the drawing was finished, Ava held it up, her voice full of joy. "Look, Auntie." A purple house stood strong in the middle of an open sky. There was sunlight, the sea, a front step, and a curly-haired woman holding hands with a little girl. At the top she had written, "Our home." I looked at her and said gently, "We don't need anyone's permission to feel worthy. That's something we get to decide." Ava nodded, her eyes far more serious than her age. I knew that from this moment forward, we wouldn't just be people shaped by old wounds. We were the ones rewriting what family means, on our own terms. What would you do if one day the very people who looked down on you came back asking for your kindness? Would you forgive? Or would you move forward with a healed heart that no longer crumbles out of pity? I chose the second path. Not because I'm cold, but because I understand now. Kindness is not something to be exploited, and family doesn't mean blind sacrifice. Family isn't about who speaks louder or who came first. If it truly deserves to be called family, it must be a place where each person gets to be themselves, is protected, and is seen. If you've ever been treated as the extra, ever been pushed away from the table, ever had to work twice as hard just to prove you were worthy of love, then this story is for you. And maybe it's time you rewrote the definition of family in your own words. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if you were in Alice's shoes? Do you believe it's possible to begin again, not with blood but with kindness? Don't forget to follow the channel to keep walking with us through raw, moving, and deeply human stories of family, betrayal, and those rare moments when people find themselves again in the wreckage they thought would never mend. Because sometimes what we need isn't a perfect family, but a place where we no longer have to hang our heads when we speak of the past.